first, I have to start with 17 years with Gasworld. That's crazy. I've barely been alive for 17 years. This morning, I thought we were the same age. Now I'm a little confused. And then I look at Jeff, and Jeff's like 110 by now, but he has the energy of someone much younger. And so my first takeaway today, not from any speakers, but just understanding that we're like drinking from the fountain to youth working in the CO2 industry. So thank you both for that. I appreciate it. Keeps me excited.
So all of you waited around for that good joke. He worked all morning on that, apparently.
It landed. That's off the cuff. We are super excited to be in Music City, and I know the distractions of Broadway are down the street, but thankfully y'all haven't ran off, at least not yet. Maybe some of you. We promised to try to be as entertaining as Broadway. Jeff was going to do the song and dance, but he's not down for the public shaming, so we're just going to have an informative session today. I'll let you kind of kick off what we plan to do, but some exciting guests will be joining us here in a few minutes after we recap.
Yeah, so we are all well aware that nobody has eaten, and it's getting kind of late, but we're going to try to keep you entertained for a little bit longer and hopefully a little educational, and kind of recap a little bit, summarize everything that happened already this morning going into tomorrow's sessions. But yeah, we are Jeff Holyoak and Luke Lana of Catching Carbon, and we really appreciate y'all being part of our podcast. So we're going to break this up into two parts. The first part is kind of going to go back to 2 years ago this week on this stage, but in Chicago. We made some kind of predictions of what we thought the market was going to do, where we were going to go, what was going to happen in the market, and by predictions, we said, today versus tomorrow, and tomorrow being 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, and we've heard a lot of great talking points about that already today. So it feeds into that. The second part is we have a panel of some great new technologies. We heard Scott talk about, we need alternative sources and we need to get these online, and some of them are coming, and there's a lot of different investments and technologies coming online. We have a few of them that they're not just capturing CO2 to sequester it or get the 45Q credits and things like that. Some of that's a part of it for sure, but they're trying to capture CO2 and service that market, service our merchant markets that are, starting to get eliminated by all the reasons that we've already heard. So two-part session in all this, but just to kind of quickly recap, what we talked about, a couple of years ago was, the market is all about disruption, and what we need is innovation. We need incentivization. That was the 45Q aspect that was still 2 years ago, just kind of coming around. And we need impact. We need change. Something has to be different, or we're going to just be sitting here. And we talked about the innovator's dilemma, which is basically when great companies fail because they don't choose to react to the changing markets, and we keep doing things the way they are. Now, we're not going to sit here today and say any of that's happened yet, but it's slowly getting there. We heard Maura say we need 5 300-ton per day plants in the next 5 years, I believe it is, just to sustain our natural growth. We heard Scott say 1,600 tons over the next 5 years a day. 1,600 tons are going to go offline by their projections. More could. Other things could happen. The Summit pipeline's a huge piece of all of that as well. How long does that take before we start putting liquid? There's not a drop of liquid has really been sequestered in a lot of these up and coming ideas. So what we said was, what's the market disruption and where's it going? So I talked about the innovator's dilemma here again. When new technologies cause great companies to fail, well, we saw Mara's list of who has the market share. It hasn't changed dramatically. A couple of swaps. You see some of the independent guys really growing over the last few years. Poet and Reliant to the best suppliers of any gas molecule in the country, probably in the world, and they are continuously growing their market share because of the way they do it and how they do it. And they're innovative and they're disruptive and they execute, and as do some of the others as well. So that's what we're really kind of here. So going into it. Did you want to jump in here so I keep going?
Yeah, I want to just think on the innovator's dilemma for a second. And as you mentioned, Reliant and Poet growing, but also they're not new. They're just executing very well. And you think of the CO2 space, Abby mentioned it this morning, we are asset heavy. So the barrier to entry is high. Tyler mentioned that supply and demand are pretty even. So there wasn't a whole lot of incentive to get involved. And what that meant was minimal investment into the CO2 market, kind of maintaining the status quo, and that was fine. Until things started to change and these new players come. And now they're being incentivized by grants, and we're going to hear about that from some of our partners that jump on stage here. Investment is being made, and things are starting to change. So have we seen these great companies fail? No. But are we on the cusp of that innovator's dilemma? Absolutely, and it's going to be the next 3 to 5 years where we really start to see the shakeup.
Yeah, I think Bruce put it extremely well. I think Rob quoted Bruce to say it, put it really well. From 2020 or 2021 through 2030, it's a state of disruption. I'm sorry, it wasn't disruption. Turbulence, I think, was the word.
Turmoil. It was
turmoil.
really painful.
Turbulence, disruption, and turmoil all put together, and that's how we get lunch. So no, I mean, it's 100% accurate. That's where we're in. We're in this state of turmoil, and it's going to continue. What are we going to do about it? So very quickly, the 4 predictions that we had 2 years ago to this day, and we've already talked about these all morning. The where you get your CO2 from today will not be where you get it from tomorrow. The who you get it from may not be who you get it from tomorrow. And what you pay, most importantly, for CO2 today will not be what you pay tomorrow. And so with that, we just want to kind of look backwards or look forwards and say, okay, 2 years ago we said this. What's happened? We've heard a lot about this today already, so we're just going to quickly recap before I bring our panel up. And then lastly,
yeah, 4th question. This is our favorite because we can quickly
great
check
prediction.
this one.
I'm really good at the predictions.
Right. What is attendance going to look like? Jeff said nobody's going to be here next year, which is now last year. But come back to 2024, we're going to have a packed house. And we can see that, so let's pop that up. How did we do last year? What did attendance look like year over year? We actually did increase, which is insane because you are human. You can be wrong. I didn't think that was possible. But I'll give you your flowers. I think you were directionally right. I think last year, there wasn't as much panic in the room, and we saw the poll earlier. We feel like supply and demand are pretty balanced. That wasn't the case 2 years ago. Last year, we started seeing some of the new faces. It wasn't just the same old distributors and a couple end users. We're starting to get into the new technologies, the new uses of CO2. So attendance was up, in my opinion, because we started to welcome new members to the family. But this year, really an impactful difference in where we were 2 years ago. Attendance way up, just like you predicted it would be.
Yeah, I mean, the notion was back in 2022, as we all know and already heard, we had disruptions of supply, we had quality issues and things of that nature that just stacked on each other, and we had all sorts of problems in the market. And there's a whole lot of pain. And when there's a lot of pain, we get a lot of people show up and want to hear about it. What do I do? What do I do? And then we forgot. We forgot the pain because we knew that. And that's why we said attendance would be down. Now, it isn't. That's why it's in red. It was actually up. That's a good thing. Well, we think it's because that was the first year that we did the podcast on the stage and everybody came just for that. But, looking around now, we can't say that anymore because everybody's eating lunch.
Humbling experience.
humbling. But no, I mean, earlier this morning, before lunch, we saw that there was a packed house in here. Every seat pretty much was taken, and there's people there. If you were upstairs last night and going up there again tonight, wonderful, beautiful venue. It's not quite big enough for all of us, but it was great. I mean, everybody's on top of each other, but it was a great attendance up there and a great group because that pain we all know is coming. When that pain started, we have new innovators and new people. The most important part about this number here, the 320 of you, I don't recognize half of you, and I don't know if you look, I mean, that's a great thing. That means there's less gas distributors, less gas suppliers, less gas companies, and so producers of equipment to the gas industries, and more people that are concerned about their supply of CO2, the users of CO2, people that want to understand 45Q credits, LCAs, and how do I do that? How do I apply for it? How does this impact me? We need more and more and more of you all in the room. So starting to see a 37% increase year on year over 2022. That's a huge jump forward, and we want to continue to see that more. So with that, we're going to talk about some of the people that are actually executing and doing that. So where you get, not going to read all this. Where you get it from today will not be where you get it from tomorrow. We already heard from everybody's presentations this morning, the pipelines, the Summit pipeline, the Trailblazer, the Wolf, all of these things. There is ways to eliminate the CO2 that's already on board. What is that? I like this one right here, the Summit Solutions. They have commitments from 57 ethanol plants today to sequester all of their CO2. Not all of them generate merchant CO2, but some of them do. And that goes into Scott's numbers that he was presenting today. Over the next 5 years, it's known, they will go offline. The Keys plants in Southern California, I mean, they were at the ISBT meeting, and he gave the entire business model of exactly why they're taking their merchant CO2 offline and sequestering all of it, because it just makes financial sense for their businesses, as well as there's a benefit to the ethanol and things like that. So that is absolutely going to continue to happen. Reliance numbers, 1,600 tons per day over the next 5 years. we have to replace that CO2 as well as grow on top of that to continue to expand. And for our purposes, we want to see more uses of CO2, not just sequestration. How can we utilize more CO2?
You know, and I just real quick want to hit on the tall grass. This is a really important point. Do not miss this, right? Maybe when the Navigator pipeline got mothballed, a sigh of relief from some people. Oh, my CO2 supply is going to be around a little longer. We have to build out infrastructure. But with that tall grass, talking about repurposing existing natural gas pipelines, some of the challenges that Navigator ran into may be overcome by this existing infrastructure. And so it might not be 5 years out. It may be sooner, depending on how creative we get. So the pipelines aren't going away. Be thinking about the maps that we saw earlier, where ethanol is, and where these pipelines are. The Dakotas, in the Corn Belt. We're going to hit on that in a little bit, but it's kind of shaping up to be a perfect storm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest non-pain factor that happened in all of this, we heard about it earlier, the Navigator pipeline was canceled. That was huge. That really woke people up, because that was going to take on, that was moving fast, had huge investment, and they were going to do all, and it was right there in the middle where all of these ethanol plants are, many of these ethanol plants are. When that got canceled, everyone, whew, okay, no problem anymore, right? Well, it is a problem, and now we really know it.
Great. And then who you get your CO2 from today will not be who you get it from tomorrow. A couple different examples, and they've all been touched on today, but we do want to look at them specifically. Biogas. We just had Patrick on the podcast. Patrick is the executive director of the American Biogas Council, and he noted that projects are exploding. In just the last year, almost $2 billion of investment into biogas. And what we find when we pick the phones up is people are thinking proactively. I'm going to upgrade my RNG, but I'm not just thinking about the methane now, I'm thinking about the CO2. We talk about the Denmark plant, and they are producing a food beverage grade CO2, but people are now looking at them as an example and getting proactive. The conferences have been growing like crazy. So biogas has some serious steam, serious momentum behind it. Other new technologies, the direct air capture, we'll pull a lot of them up here in a minute, talk about what that looks like. But many of these hubs going to be located down in Texas, the Southwest. We have a note. Carbon Capture just announced they actually aren't going to do their project in Wyoming. Sounds like it's going to be more in the Arizona-Texas region. So as we look at the wells closing, we have these large DAC hubs being produced in the same space. Does that change where the CO2 comes from? Are we going to be able to do it at volume? It's really something we need to pay close attention to.
That carbon capture really feeds into the next one, the cost and the pay. Mm-hmm. Why did they not stay in Wyoming? Because there's not enough renewable energy to run their capture plant. So you need to renew it to be purely green. You need renewable energy to capture the CO2. We all know renewable energy today is more expensive than fossil-based energy sources. It's going to get more expensive, which feeds into our last one. And again, don't look at the charts. Don't worry about it. We've already covered a lot of the reasons why we all believe CO2 will most likely be more expensive. The baseline simple one was, well, if I get $85 a ton to sequester it, isn't that the new baseline cost? Isn't that the baseline cost? Why not sequester all of my CO2 and sell it in the merchant market for less than I can get to sequester it? So that's kind of the baseline, and you're going to see that escalate for a whole lot of other reasons. Some of that being smaller sources. Some of these sources, we heard biogas, 30 to 50 tons a day, not the 400 tons per day type of systems. Now you have to transport it farther, more frequently, aggregate it. All of those things add cost to it. And then you need renewable energies, you need a lot of other things. So the thing that you haven't heard about today, and we are not going to get into the details of it, but there's something called CDRs, carbon dioxide removal credits. It's a carbon credit trading system. We here in America don't really get too involved in the carbon trade. Europeans much farther along in all of this, but these are, and you talk about all your major high-tech companies, are buying carbon offset credits from direct air capture companies, from even ethanol plants are viable for these carbon credits. So if you capture them, then you could sell those credits to Microsoft and Google and all these companies that have data centers that are using tremendous amounts of energy, therefore using or creating tremendous amounts of CO2. Well, they can keep doing that over here if they capture it over here, guys. So the whole point of all that is CO2 has a value now. It didn't before. A lot of these ethanol plants, they were just a source gas. It was it's an offshoot. Maybe a lot of them started capturing the methane off of it, but putting that into pipelines, doing RNG, things like that, and very few, if any, really ever captured the CO2. They're starting to now on these RNG facilities and things like that. But now there's a value to CO2, and when there's a value, now there's a competitive market, supply and demand. Not enough supply, price is going to go up. for all of us for our merchant use. So there's all these factors are feeding into exactly what we said 2 years ago. And again, none of it's happened dramatically yet today, but it certainly is coming.
Oh, and let's further complicate it one more time. If you hit next, what about competing uses, sustainable aviation fuel? So there are other products coming into the market. My prediction, next year's panel when we are here, we're going to be talking about new uses of CO2.
Absolutely.
I think that is going to be the next leg of this stool, the fifth leg. Those parties coming out and getting involved in the CO2 Summit. But the sustainable...
Most stools have 3 legs, so it's usually just the 3 legs of a stool, then you're adding a 4th leg.
Right, so. We're gonna really stabilize. But what's interesting is sustainable aviation.
Stable CO2, so your prediction is we're gonna have a stable CO2 supply. That's your prediction?
No. We're gonna make up for the unstable market with a really stable conference.
Oh, all right.
With our fifth ad. The conference is going to be phenomenal.
And we're going to serve food in here while we talk about it.
I'm getting lightheaded. No, with the sustainable aviation fuel, though, it's really interesting because I talked about paying attention to the maps. Lana just announced a huge factory in Illinois where all the pipelines are running through, where the ethanol production is, where we're going to look at sequestration. So it's just going to get very complex, and that simple supply and demand balance, man, it gets really shaky in the coming
Absolutely.
years.
I mean, add to, we heard earlier, your urea production, that's going to take off CO2. There's other sources for CO2, and if you can get a utilization credit, whether it's $60 or $85, again, why are you not going to do that? All of these things diminish our current supply that we all need for the existing use cases today. We heard about Canada, their regulations are shutting that down. That's going to diminish our overall supply here in the U.S. All of these things, again, competing interests that are going to feed into it all.
Yeah. So, hey, Jeff, you know what? I would say you were pretty spot on with predictions 2 years ago. Think you nailed them, and I think they kind of carry into the future. But with that said, you got a couple takeaways?
I think we're going to be having this conference for years to come, and I'm pretty sure because CO2 has become so important as much as hydrogen has, that I think there's an announcement later and a sponsorship that's included here at the Gasworld CO2 Summit for the CO2 View magazine that the Gasworld's putting out. Why? Because CO2 is a critical component to a lot of things that we do. It's an ingredient, it's a chemical, it's everything that we use it for. It is not all bad. Sure, too much of it is bad. Too much of anything is bad. CO2 is a critical component that we must protect, use, and we don't want to see the cost escalate so much that we find alternatives like nitrogen for food freezing and things like that. I say it all the time, yes, you can freeze food with nitrogen, but I don't recall a whole lot of wind turbines or solar panels sitting outside of air separation plants. So don't tell me that nitrogen is cleaner than CO2. It's cleaner on your site, but it's not cleaner if you do the entire LCA life cycle analysis of that nitrogen. We don't want to see that. We want to see more CO2. Let's capture what we already have. So we ultimately one day, as Exxon said, 2050, oil flat, right? We're going to need the same amount. The only way you start to see that diminish is get off the need for fossil-based carbon and get recaptured carbon. Capture the carbon from the air, capture the carbon from flue gases, capture the carbon from wherever. Utilize what we've already generated so we have the less need to pull it out over time. Is that going to happen tomorrow? Absolutely not. By 2050, a lot of these guys, Shell, BP, Exxon, they've doubled down on oil production last year. They invested heavily in that. Yeah, sure, we have some money going into carbon and carbon neutrality and things like that, but some of that is just word salad a little bit. It sounds great, but the money is really being invested. Let's pump more oil because that's where we make our money and that's the profitabilities of them. Yeah. So that's how we're going to get there. So I think we go to the panel from here, right?
Let's bring the panel.
All right, let's not. So we got some 3 great technology companies we're going to introduce really quick and let them tell us about what they're doing. And again, this isn't about their technologies. I think a couple of them are presenting tomorrow, so you'll learn about their technologies and their products and their markets. We want to understand what are the challenges that they face today trying to break into these existing markets. They are the innovator, that the innovator's dilemma we talk about. Who can disrupt the market? There's three different companies that are going to come up here today and tell us what challenges they are facing. Because again, none of them are one of them is actually producing liquid going into some merchant supply. But I mean, when you look at Maura's graph about where the supply comes from, they wouldn't even be a blip on it because we're not there yet. But we want to support them. We want to understand it. I think Scott said it well. We need more innovation. We've got to support these guys. How do we do it? So we're going to ask them, what kind of challenges are they facing? So we're going to bring them up one at a time.
Mike Lacious, Director
Mike
of
Lacious.
Business Development, CarbonQuest, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the hot seat.
And next we
Which
have...
one's the hot seat?
You get to choose which seat's the hottest.
Next we have Skytree. So we have Elena Nikonova from Skytree, the direct air capture. And again, we're going to let them introduce themselves. They can tell you about what they do way better than we can. So Elena, thank you for coming. And lastly,
Yeah, Matt Atwood
there, I was throwing it
from
up.
Air Capture. Welcome, Matt, CEO and founder. We're excited to have you today. Thank you for joining us.
So now we're just going to have panel discussion. Again, let's let you guys introduce yourselves really quick. Why don't we start with you, Michael? Or Michael, sorry.
I answered to both.
I answered just about anything. It's fine. I answered to food too. So if anybody wants to bring a sandwich up, that's fine too.
And I answered to Jeff. It's pretty simple for me. So
Perfect. Anyway.
All right. I'm Mike Lacious. As Jeff said, leading our business development efforts at CarbonQuest. We're a Spokane, Washington-based company focused on the commercial industrial space, so capturing CO2 out of the existing environment. So, you hear about hard to abate. Well, we're focused on the hard to abate, but not in the sense of, steel and cement, but other smaller scale commercial industrial that doesn't have the opportunity for whatever reasons, maybe to electrify immediately or change their infrastructure, maybe for whatever reason cost prohibitive. So we're able to do something now to help companies achieve their goals of decarbonizing. We're working on our 6th installation in New York City. As you saw on the video, that's where we began with decarbonization of some very large-scale apartment buildings. In those cases, the CO2 is being liquefied and transported to Brooklyn and injected into a carbon cure system for concrete blocks.
So you are actually capturing CO2 and redeploying and selling it back into the merchant market today.
We are.
Yeah, it's impressive. So again, still small scale, but on your 6th one already, that's great. We've known this group for, when did we meet? You saw Shane and Steak and a couple of the other ones, probably 3 or 4 years now. And so they were one of the early kind of innovators in this space of capturing off of flue gas in high-rise buildings in New York City. Super impressive group. Check them out. You'll hear and learn more about them as the years continue on or the weeks continue on. Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Elena.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Elena Nikonova. I'm a VP of Strategy for Skytree. We are a Dutch company that makes decentralized direct air capture units. So I know that mostly in North America, when you hear direct air capture, you think like big plants, like something very custom. We actually have a product. It's a standard product that you can put wherever you need to either sequester or use CO2. So right now we have 5 deployments for the greenhouse and vertical farming sector, where the machines are capturing CO2 and delivering for the plants, because plants need CO2 to grow. But we actually are deploying units for all kinds of industries, like water treatment or cement, concrete, all the industries that need CO2 right at the site where they want to capture and use that CO2. Yeah.
Headquartered in Amsterdam.
Headquartered in Amsterdam. I'm based in Toronto. Our U.S. office is actually here in Nashville, opening this week.
You guys really are decentralized.
Yeah, totally, exactly decentralized. Yeah.
So we met Skytree at the Gasworld CO2 Summit in Austria in Europe earlier this year. Actually, I think Luke said something really derogatory about direct air capture and how it was useless and didn't make any sense.
I thought I was
something along that line. And Rob Van Straten will be presenting tomorrow, so you'll learn a lot more about their products. But they were just standing there at the stage ready to attack us when we got off, and they're like, "What are you talking about? We're doing it today." We've really formed a great relationship and partnership with them.
This is before I realized we had the 4th leg of the stool. So I thought I was in a safe space, and now we're best friends.
Yeah, they are making I'll oversimplify it again. Rob will speak to their products better tomorrow, but they are commercializing direct air capture today, low energy output. Still not huge amount of CO2 captured, but it's scalable and it's repeatable and it's commercialized, and that's where we're going to continue to grow. And then so next to Elena, we have Matt Atwood from Air Capture Inc., another direct air capture. So we're actually very new to us. We're just getting to know them, but a lot of, fascinating stuff that they're working on as well. Matt, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm Matt Atwood, CEO of Air Capture. We're based in Berkeley, California. We've been developing direct air capture technologies now since about 2019, and we're delivering commercial products today. We have a modular direct air capture kind of platform where individual module sizes can deliver anywhere from 12.5 kilograms per hour up to about 125 kilograms per hour, and then they're stackable. We also develop liquefaction technologies where we can deliver kind of 5 nines liquid to our customers, and we're commercializing into a variety of different markets currently. We just delivered our first commercial facility, which is going into the Middle East for sequestration. We shipped that in July. We'll commission it in a few weeks here in October. And we're also kind of focusing on the merchant market space where we're deploying on-site solutions for CO2 liquid gas products to our customers in the beverage carb and cement and various different market applications.
I think that's interesting. Your board, senior leadership, some of them in this room, have a background in industrial gas. And so, typically you do see the PhD scientist come in with direct air capture, but you guys have diversified to kind of understand the market you're targeting and have a balance of development, new technology, but also an understanding of the space you're stepping into. So I do think that's really interesting to know. You are probably the first company I've seen in the direct air capture space with that type of team.
Yeah, we're really focused on on-site merchant solutions. We think, of course, sequestration, power to liquids, e-fuels, things like this are going to be very important in the future. But that infrastructure is 5 years away. Yeah. And so the question is, how do you get on the learning curve? How do you develop technology? How do you commercialize technology? And how do you build a sustainable business model to get from here to there? And some of these other, approaches in direct air capture that require very large facilities that are primarily focused on sequestration. This is, I think it's a risky model, and it's gonna, there's a lot to figure out between now and then.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah. So the premise of this panel was that we have 3 companies that are doing it today. They are producing merchant available CO2 for our markets today with new technologies at what we will believe to be a reasonably cost competitive nature. And that's what we wanted, is to hear where they're at. Now, you probably heard some of the volumes. We'll let everybody kind of speak to some of their volumes as needed. Let's talk about half a ton per day. That's not replacing a 400 ton per day plant. So there's challenges that go along with it. But they're also not, we have a beta site and then we're going to go capture 10 million tons next year. They're doing it today. The next step will be 2 tons per day, 10 tons per day, 50 tons per day. I don't know. I'll let them speak to it. But that's the premise of this panel. So I'll open up with the first general question, and then whoever wants to jump in, please answer it. What's your biggest challenge? Not technically, market penetration challenge to getting your CO2 into the market. What are you facing today? Maybe we'll just start and go down.
Well, I think just navigating the market space itself, because we're looking at, for some projects we might need to go to sequestration just because of our customers' goals. So we're navigating that space, keeping an eye on the sustainable aviation fuel, how that's going to play. We've got projects that are both biogenic and non-biogenic. So just net gas from a boiler, maybe non-biogenic. Gas from a wood-fired electrical facility, generating facility, would be biogenic. So looking at those different sources. A lot of the challenges are around the various regulations and policies, and that's constantly evolving, whether it's at the state level, local level. As you saw from the video, we started out in New York City in anticipation of their local law 97, which taxed all the building owners on their emissions. And so that was a great start for us. But now we're moving into much larger scale projects. Those were probably in the 1,000 tons a year range. And now we'll look at projects, a couple 100,000 tons a year of CO2. So really identify and kind of connect at the local level, because where we develop our projects, we want to develop relationships with the end users. And I think that can be a real advantage, because we're cutting out a lot of transportation if we can match up the market with our projects.
So you can have localized capture, production, use.
Right. Sustainable CO2 at a local level.
That's outstanding. Perfect. Thank you. Elena, biggest commercial challenges so far?
Yes. So I come from an EV industry, right? So I've been working there for 10 years. So, and I've talked to, I don't know, over 70 different companies, small and big, in different industries ever since that I joined Skytree. And there are two perceptions about DAC, and that is it's expensive and that it does not exist. Basically, all these large plants that we hear about, it's really seen as like something, a toy for billionaires, So one of the questions I get asked, so like, how much does a ton cost? Like $1,200 or something? Well, that's actually not the reality. I mean, and I don't want to get into this discussion, what is exactly in the cost per ton, like energy, inflation, et cetera. But I mean, it's not $1,200 for us, for example. It's somewhere around $300 at the moment, and we're very quickly shaving that cost off. So, that is, I would say, the challenge, the perception around DAC, because of all of these large 45Q projects that are.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, because that seems like that would be a challenge for everybody, because the news is all about these big projects.
Exactly.
But it's also that we need federally funded taxes to pay for it. I can't remember, I think it was Scott, you said it earlier, that, this is a tax on all of us. Capturing the CO2 is a tax on all of us. It will go into the cost of our products, into our food, into our beverages and things like that. So if we're going to pay $85 a ton to put it into the ground, well, that doesn't go away. Direct air capture, I can't remember the number, $180 a ton, I think you get something like that. But, so getting over that hurdle, that's really interesting.
And maybe to that as well, why have we been hearing about these large sequestration projects? It's because, the IRA has been primarily sponsoring these projects and not so much utilization,
Well,
which we've
you need
slowly been
12,500
seeing
tons captured a year just to receive the credits, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Matt?
I mean, I would say the biggest kind of commercial challenge at the moment is, from our perspective, is getting, working with the customers to provide a longer-term contract, 10, 15-year offtake agreement for an on-site product, and convincing them to switch supply for something that's a critical commodity for their day-to-day operations. I mean, typically, when we talk to customers, CO2 represents somewhere between 1% and 5% of OpEx. So there's not a lot of interest in capitalizing equipment to address that, because typically it makes more sense to invest in expansion, to invest that you get a better ROI on increasing capacity. So the sort of chicken and egg problem in our perspective is, how do we finance these projects? How do we leverage project finance? What kind of insurance products do we need to put in place for the offtake supply, for the purity? And how do we feather that in to an offtake agreement where the tenor matches the requirement on the payback period?
All right, Matt, so one thing you mentioned there is trying to encourage, your end user to make the change from what they see as relatively stable supply today. Thinking that through, you have, let's say, a single unit, and this will apply to everybody, but I'll let you address this, where they may be getting supply from many different sources, and they do have a level of assurance that if there is an outage over here, they're going to get supply from over there from their supplier, because they've built out that infrastructure. So how do you address, when that question comes up, when you're sitting down with them working through deals, an assurance of supply? Because as soon as they shut off and they make the change to work with air capture, they're not getting CO2 from anybody else.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of ways to deal with that. One is provide excess capacity for the customer. And it's a modular kind of technology, so it's unlikely, unless there's some kind of critical power failure at the plant, that we'll have a systemic downturn of the facility. So we can work on it on an engineering basis. We can solve those challenges. But we also provide, we could provide liquid tanks, and we can guarantee supply by going out and finding other supplies of CO2 to fill that need. And what we're finding in the market is, CO2 pricing varies wildly based on geography. And we have customers that are paying up to $2,200 a ton for CO2. And so they have a significant, pain point there, and they have supply disruptions regularly. So, we do see certain customers in the market that are very eager to switch now, and then other customers that, are taking a much longer time to really do the detailed engineering analysis and figure out how do we solve these problems.
Yeah, very interesting. So, you kind of generated a question and all that for me, for all of you. We talked about the innovator's dilemma, and at the end of the day, large companies that already have a huge market share sometimes have a hard time getting out of their own way. And they always, the Polaroid and the digital camera, or Blockbuster and Netflix are your primary examples of something like that. In the gas world, are you being welcomed with open arms by the gas industry, or some of the gas majors that are already in this market saying, hey, let's partner, how do we work together? Or are you getting pushback, or you feel like you have to hurdle anybody? Maybe kind of start here and just work down and speak to what you can and can't. Obviously, we don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah,
I don't mind offending
names.
people, but
No. Yeah, from my viewpoint, there are companies that are more progressive in this space and get it and are thinking longer term strategically and want to be in at the ground level, with new sources like CarbonQuest and our customers. I've gotten some pushback from folks that are concerned about perception of, we talked about this morning, the quality. And how are you going to ensure your beverage grade quality?
call SIG.
Call SIG, absolutely. But just overcoming that problem with perception of what the source is.
Right.
Is it better to have beverage grade CO2 from an ethanol plant versus industrial boiler?
I always like that.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things in the beverage. Like, oh, do we want it? We don't want to know it came from farm waste in my soda. I'm like, did you really want to know that it came from an ammonia plant? We don't know where our CO2 comes from today as general consumers. I mean, we in this room know, but the general consumer has no idea. But I understand why there's a perception hurdle. So,
Yeah.
Elena, any challenges or partnerships or welcome with open arms of the industrial gas majors?
So specifically in Europe, I see, there's for example an OCAP pipeline that distributes gas, and they're just gonna they're gonna have a shortage of fossil fuel gas very soon, and they gotta fill that up with something, right? And that's kind of like we come in as Skytree that will be building a large DAC hub to fill up that pipeline so that they don't have that.
So that pipeline aggregates various sources and supplies of CO2 and then distributes.
Correct.
That's it. Yeah, we do not have that here.
Yeah. I think there's one actually announced in Iowa pretty recently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Very interesting. Matt?
Well, we've seen some of the projects that we're looking at, we can overproduce CO2, and we've had interest from industrial gas companies in certain geographies to have interest in off-taking some of that supply in places where it's really hard to get the CO2 as to be transported long distances. I think generally speaking, our view is it's highly unlikely that kind of incumbent industrial gas supply companies are going to be eager to kind of cannibalize their logistics infrastructure. So they're going to, I think that this market, on-site CO2 production, will have to grow pretty substantially before I think the incumbent suppliers really see this as an attractive alternative to the businesses that they already have in place.
I do wonder if we see like a divergence where these gases are commodities and gas suppliers are supplying a lot more than just CO2. But now with the peaked interest from Microsoft, from Google, and trading credits, and does it just become a whole separate industry where there is a clear divide? And that's kind of a rhetorical question, but it's just things have shifted so greatly from what the core business was, and seeing investment from tech, VC getting involved, it just feels so different.
Well, maybe I'll go out on a limb and say something a little bit controversial here and take issue with one of the last slides that you showed, which is, something like 97% of CDR sales are undelivered. So this is a massive bubble. A lot of these CDR sales, none of them are sales. These are all forward purchase obligations. And so what the market is doing is, the Microsofts and the Amazons and Shopify's of the world are saying, we're gonna buy these credits, and then the DAC companies are saying, okay, we sold these carbon credits, but that's not true. That's not revenue. It's a forward purchase obligation, and a lot of these technologies are high risk, low TRL, haven't commercialized, and so I think what we're going to see is a large percentage of this CDR forward purchase offtake become just ultimately not delivered. They won't be delivered at the prices. The companies won't be able to to generate profitability from these things. And I think it's, we're a couple years away from seeing the sort of burst of this market dynamic, which is great because we have Microsofts of the world and others saying, we really want to support this nascent industry. And then you have Shopify's of the world and Frontiers putting together kind of 5-7 year offtake agreements. But that's typically not enough for project financing. So who's going to take the risk on those extra couple years? So I do think there's a big mismatch, and I definitely think there's going to be a correction in the next couple years relative to CDR stuff.
They make for really great headlines, though.
Yeah, just this morning, right? We saw Frontier buyers announce $4.5 million of credits purchased from different technologies, 2 of them DAC, 2 of them US-based, none of them on stage. Sold for $500 a ton and $1,950 a ton. And I don't necessarily think that was the cost to produce, but it's just a forward-based credit. We're going to get there. But that news just broke prior to us stepping up here. So,
I just to that point, actually most of the credits are bought by one company and Microsoft, right?
Yeah,
I
and
think
97, that's a great number. 97% are unfulfilled. But they keep growing the number and growing the big pool, but they're not actually fulfilling it because they're not. And once they start doing it, if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't think they'll be able to do it at the cost they expected to do it, and therefore they won't fulfill it at all because they'll be losing money every time they fulfill a credit. Is that kind of what you're thinking today?
Yeah, I mean, some will and some won't. Yeah. But I think that those that don't will hurt the industry.
All right, Elena, anything to add to that one?
And I just wanted to add that exactly. So Microsoft is buying. Is actually right now buying all the credits, and I don't know if anybody read the recent SBTI report, but it's there's going to be maybe a dip in the VCM market in total, and that's why I think this conversation is so important, because it's not just about the volunteer carbon market and selling carbon credits, but CO2 as making a valuable product out of CO2.
Well, and I think Jeff and I believe in that bubble to a degree as well, where the conversation is utilization. And you 3 are differentiated in the sense that you're anchoring to that. You're not selling carbon credits. You're trying to get into utilization of CO2. But I want to address this head on. Selling a credit at $1,950 and somebody in the Corn Belt paying $150 per ton of CO2. And you're saying, Elena, DAC exists. That we're past that. That's not the question anymore. Convince me that DAC can be viable at a cost that's reasonable. Jeff predicted the price of CO2 is going to change. Well, I think we all believe that. It won't be $150, but it's not going to be $1,900. So if you each would kind of talk through your technology, where are you today on a cost per ton basis? And then how does that scale short-term, medium-term?
Right. So the $950, that we're talking about these custom projects that are being built. And because they're custom engineered, that's where you get that cost from. So there are a couple of things on the how do we scale that down. Right? The first one is energy. So we all know DAC, right? Energy intensive. So how do we, besides obviously building a more renewable grid, how do we scale that down? One of the ways is, for example, using alternative sources of energy like heat, like industrial waste heat or geothermal. We are, for example, designing a unit that takes industrial waste heat as its energy source. So the first one is energy. The second one is make standard product. When you make a standard product, it's much easier to get that cost down, And then the final one, and I think you already you kind of touched upon that, is deployments. Have like smaller deployments, because it's only through those deployments that you're going to actually learn and innovate and make your product much better. So yeah.
Mike, anything to add?
Yeah, $1,900 a ton. It's signing up all day. We'll make any project work. But, our projects, we've been below the 45Q threshold, so we're working, without those credits. As we get into some bigger projects, that'll of course help. but really the economics of matching up with the distributors and utilization to make the economics work. And I think, as somebody pointed out, trying to get to those longer term contracts so that we can match up the economics of a project with the buyer's needs will generate more projects, more CO2 in the market.
Perfect. Let's close up with one last question that kind of feeds into all of that. I'll ask each of you to make a prediction into your crystal ball. But I personally am not a believer of subsidies and tax credits and things like that. They're a bridge, they're a runway to get us to the technology, so they're necessary. 45Q, 45V, all of these things are necessary in hydrogen and CO2 to get us to a point, but you can't build a business model where that is forever, right? So in your world, I know, and I know a little bit about all your business models. I don't think you are all very much in need of any of these credits, or like you said, you're under the threshold anyway in a lot of these individual projects. What is your projection? Very one word answer or 2-word answer of how long will it take for you to get to that cost level where you can be profitable without any tax incentives, any federal subsidies? 1 year, 5 year, 10 years. How long before you believe that you will be somewhere close to break even?
I think we're there in terms of where we need to be to make projects work. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any customers signing up for these projects to start with, because we don't have those subsidies. Some of it's in cases you're trading off cost avoidance or penalty avoidance, so that comes into the economics as well. But we believe we're the lowest levelized cost of carbon capture out there.
Wow, outstanding.
And we're making improvements, and as our sources are evolving, as we've gone from a boiler in an apartment building to looking at different sources like combined heat and power, district energy, fuel cells, where you can get CO2 sources, emission sources that are much higher concentration, then our process becomes much more efficient and economical, especially sources that run continuously.
But you're already there. That's outstanding. Elena, Skytree, how long?
I know you want like a one line, like a one word, right?
I just said 2, 1 or 2. Mike used like 10. You got 8.
So are we there yet? I mean, yes, because we have deployments. Is that everywhere? No. I mean, in some markets it totally makes sense. In Australia, where they pay like what, $1,200, $1,500 per ton of CO2. That totally makes sense there, right? In some states where they're like paying upwards of like $700 a ton, absolutely. So it definitely makes sense. It's just right now it's a question of geography, industry, right? So and then with those incentives, which I totally agree with you, it should not, it shouldn't like be there always, but it's kind of a Kickstarter for these. For companies like us to get there and for it to be affordable.
Matt?
I would say we're there now as well. I think our estimate is we can probably address about 10% of the merchant CO2 market at our current costs, and we're driving those costs down substantially over time. We think, by exiting next year, we'll be in a very cost competitive place relative to a large chunk of the market. But I would say, I think it's important. I do think that government subsidies are really critical to de-risk early stages of the technology, and that's a good place for that kind of effort. And we need to compete on a level playing field. I mean, oil and gas is subsidized roughly 100 times between exploration and the pump. So I think that in order for these nascent technologies to develop, they have to become financeable, bankable, and they have to be appropriately risk mitigated. And it's a complicated analysis to put that all together.
Outstanding.
Yeah, you know what? Really excited y'all are up here, and tomorrow you'll get to hear Matt talk about their technology and Rob with Skytree and understand more about direct air capture. But really, this is the first time where we're opening up to a larger audience here in the U.S., and it's crazy to hear we're there, right? I mean, this is not pie in the sky, but rather there are deployments, action is being taken. We are big advocates for the use of CO2, Jeff and myself. We love it. We don't want to just see sequestration. We want to see new products. We want to see the pie as a whole grow. And I do believe that there is room for everybody to be involved. So please, I mean, stop by, talk with these fine folks out at the booths and walking around, use that time tonight. But these conversations have to happen for the greater good of everybody in this market as it really starts to shift.
Yeah, and I know you have recently closed Series A funding. I'm going to guess the other two on the panel are always interested in raising funds as well. So go speak to them. If you believe they're already there, then that's something really investable, and I think that's super impressive. So.